Dina Cho had already printed the loan worksheet before Wade Tucker parked outside the bank because everything about the situation looked predictable from her desk. A tenant operator in worn coveralls, 60 feet of uncertainty between lease expiration and estate sale, old pickup in the lot with 318,400 miles on the odometer, and a deadline set by a probate calendar that did not care about anyone's feelings. She expected a request for an 80% loan-to-value mortgage, maybe a bridge line for closing costs, maybe co-signers if cash flow looked thin. By 10 that morning, she had penciled in terms at 7.15% fixed for 15 years and an estimated annual payment just under $138,000 on a $1,040,000 note, because that was what this meeting usually meant. Wade sat down, set a manila folder on the table, and answered Dina's first question with 8 words, calm and flat. "I am not here to borrow for land." Dina looked up, waited for the qualifying sentence, and heard none. Wade opened the folder, slid over treasury statements and money market confirmations, and the room shifted from underwriting to verification in less than a minute. Liquid balance as of that morning, $1,462,000. No term debt, no equipment line filings, no real estate mortgage to clear. The only request was same-day cashier documentation for earnest money, once the right of first refusal was exercised against the estate's outside offer. Dinah checked the statements twice because that was her job, not because she thought Wade was lying. She ran the account numbers through internal lookup, called operations, and got the same answer back, fully verified funds. The old truck in the parking lot had not changed. Wade had not changed. Every assumption tied to appearance changed at once. Dina put the loan worksheet face down, pulled up the cash close checklist, and asked for the recorded lease memorandum language on first refusal terms. Wade handed over another page, tabbed in blue. "Section 12, she said. That morning solved one obstacle and created the next one immediately. Mark Delaney, executor for his mother Ruth's estate, wanted speed more than anything. He had a bona fide outside offer at $1,248,000 for the 260 acres plus Hogs site, and probate counsel wanted the sale completed without delay. Wade could match and close, or Wade could step aside and lose the ground she had leased from January 1st, 2016 through December 31st, 2021. By noon, Dinah had moved from potential lender to document witness because financing had dropped out of the problem. By late afternoon, the issue was execution discipline under pressure. Wade signed notice to exercise, delivered earnest money, and drove home in the same truck. To understand why that quiet meeting carried the weight of a verdict, the story has to go back to a hot morning in 2015, standing near a fence line at a foreclosure auction where Wade learned exactly what debt does when a good year stops. The auction in 2015 took place on Wade's uncle's 180 acres, and nobody in the crowd believed that was where his life would end when he borrowed to expand 3 years earlier. He had added ground at high cash rent, financed equipment, and carried variable operating debt because corn over $5 had made every projection look reasonable. The problem arrived in sequence, not all at once. Hog margins narrowed first. Feed cost ran higher than expected for 2 cycles. Then a wet spring pushed planting late and cut yields. Interest adjusted upward on money he had planned to roll. By the time the lender forced liquidation, the farm was not unproductive. It was overcommitted. Wade was 32 and had enough practical knowledge to know everyone in that ring was watching a math problem resolve in public. The auctioneer's chant sounded fast, yet each item sold slower than it should have, at prices below replacement and below memory. A grain truck that had cost $41,000 sold for $23,500. A planter with years left in it brought $18,000. The 180 acres, ground that had carried 3 generations, closed at a number that covered debt and fees and left almost nothing behind. Nobody mocked him. Nobody needed to. Silence did that work. Wade stood at the back, watched her uncle sign papers with a hand that shook, and left with one decision made hard enough to survive social pressure. She would not build a farm on borrowed optimism. That vow solved a philosophical question and created a practical one. If she refused expansion debt, she still needed scale to make hog finishing pay. She had skill, labor discipline, and a reputation for clean barns, but she did not own enough ground to spread fixed costs. Late in 2015, Ruth Delaney offered a path that matched Wade's method. Ruth was a widow who had kept careful records after her husband died, and she trusted signed terms over verbal understandings. She had 260 acres and a modest finishing site that needed work, and she wanted one tenant for both land and barns. Someone steady, no drama, no missed rent. The lease term ran January 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2021. Cash rent was $72 per acre per year on 260 acres, which set annual land rent at $18,720. Hog site lease was $18,000 per year. Total annual lease obligation, $36,720, due on schedule regardless of market mood. Ruth added one clause that looked minor in calm years and decisive in stress years: a written right of first refusal if she or her estate ever chose to sell, matched to bona fide offer terms. Her attorney recorded a memorandum referencing the lease and that clause in county records. Wade signed, paid first installment, and started on the one-line item she could not avoid. The hog site had capacity for 1,100 head per turn, and enough deferred maintenance to threaten that capacity if ignored. Wade spent $84,000 cash in 2016 on refurbishment, concrete patching, curtain systems, feeder repair, ventilation controls, pit pump overhaul, and 2 used bin augers that looked ugly and ran fine. She chose cash because liens on infrastructure would have violated the discipline she had just set for herself. That decision pinched hard in the short term. Her checkbook dropped fast in the spring, and neighbors who saw the old truck and old jacket concluded she was scraping by. She did not correct them. She was busy turning a vulnerable asset into a reliable machine. That first year on Delaney ground was about proving throughput. Wade targeted 2.5 turns per year at 1,100 head each, 2,750 finished head annually if health and feed conversion held. She logged weights by pen, tracked mortality daily, and treated manure nutrient value as a partial fertilizer offset rather than fantasy credit. The system worked because she refused shortcuts that create later costs. She changed worn bearings before failure. She patched roof seams before wind season. She bought used parts at auction when quality matched need and skipped every cosmetic upgrade that did not touch up time. By winter, the barns were no longer a liability. They were predictable. Predictability opened the next loop: cash retention. Wade's year-by-year ledger from 2016 through 2021 became the spine of everything that followed, and each number came with a memory attached to keep it grounded in real work. 2016 net operating surplus came in at $148,000 after rent, feed, labor, utilities, maintenance, and the full $84,000 refurbishment cash outlay. On the morning, she finalized books. Freezing rain glazed the yard, and she stood in a machine shed doorway with a calculator fogging from her breath. 2017 net operating surplus was $206,000. In July, a power outage hit during humid weather, and she slept in the barn office for 2 nights to monitor backup systems. 2018 net operating surplus was $219,000. A feed delivery arrived late after a highway closure, and she borrowed one neighbor's hopper trailer for 6 hours, paid him cash, and avoided ration disruption. 2019 net operating surplus was $228,000. She found a hairline crack in a pit transfer line during a routine check and fixed it before contamination risk turned into a catastrophe. 2020 net operating surplus was $201,000. Supply chain delays raised parts costs, and she substituted repair labor for replacement spending where safety allowed. 2021 net operating surplus was $216,000. She closed books in a truck cab with snow blowing sideways, heater fan on low, checking that 6 years of discipline had produced options rather than obligations. From 2017 through 2021, the average annual net operating surplus was $214,000, exactly as her record showed. Across those 5 years, retained operating surplus totaled $1,070,000. Added to 2016 surplus and earlier savings from prior custom work, minus taxes, living draw, and routine working capital swings, her liquid position by June 2022 reached $1,462,000 in cash and short-term treasury bills. She never described that trajectory in public. She did not need applause for arithmetic. Every rent payment to Ruth posted on time. Every barn turn stayed on schedule. Every winter, the truck started. Social dismissal arrived in small doses that added up. Equipment dealers steered around Wade on lots because they assumed no buying power. Sales reps pitched her only entry packages while offering premium terms to operators with higher visible spending. At a winter meeting, one lender joked, gently and publicly, that she still dressed like her first season out of school. Wade answered with one sentence about feed conversion and left before coffee refill. Her restraint did not come from shyness. She had already sorted the hierarchy in her own head: production first, ownership second, opinion somewhere far below both. Ruth Delaney noticed what others missed. Rent was never late. Field boundaries were respected. Soil tests were returned with clear notes. Lease clauses were followed without reminders. Their conversations stayed short and specific. Weather, manure timing, tile repairs, legal paperwork, nothing theatrical. Ruth updated estate files every year, and when she signed the recorded lease memorandum in 2016, she told Wade one practical thing: if there is ever a sale, written terms keep everyone honest. That line did not sound dramatic at the time. In 2022, it became the hinge. Ruth died in March 2022. Grief moved through the community first, and paperwork followed fast. Mark Delaney, her son and estate executor, lived 2 states away and wanted liquidation completed in one cycle, no extended negotiations, no management burden. He listed the 260 acres and hog site together. Outside interest came quickly because contiguous acreage and functioning livestock infrastructure were hard to find. By early summer, Mark held a bona fide offer at $1,248,000. Probate counsel advised him to honor the right of first refusal if properly exercised and matched on terms. He sent formal notice to Wade with a short response window. Deadline pressure resolved one hesitation and forced another. Wade no longer had to wonder whether ownership might become possible one day. The offer in her hand made the question immediate and binary. Match now or lose permanently. She called Dinah at the bank because cashier documentation and title coordination still required institutional plumbing, even with no loan request. Dina saw a tenant in a weathered truck and prepared for debt. Wade showed verified liquidity. That same-day reversal settled the credibility question and made execution possible before the window closed. The legal mechanics mattered. Wade's claim held because the right of first refusal was written in the 2016 lease and tied to bona fide offer terms, and a memorandum had been recorded, so no one could pretend the clause was private lore. Mark's counsel reviewed the match package, confirmed purchase price, earnest money amount, closing timeline, and property scope were identical to the outside offer. Once those boxes were checked, estate duties shifted from preference to compliance. Mark did not owe Wade affection. He owed his mother's documents respect. He accepted the match and moved the file to closing. Closing in July 2022 looked almost quiet from the outside. Purchase price was $1,248,000. Closing costs were $22,000. Total cash outlay, $1,270,000. Funds came directly from Wade's retained earnings and Treasury ladder liquidation. No mortgage filing followed the deed. No bank lien appeared in county records after transfer. When wire confirmation landed, Wade's liquid reserve dropped from $1,462,000 to $192,000, a level she considered thin but survivable, given paid-off real estate and ongoing operation. She drove home on county road gravel with the same keys, same truck, same chores waiting. Mark Delaney's role resolved cleanly. Estate proceeds distributed without litigation. Beneficiaries received scheduled disbursements. Taxes and probate fees were paid on time. Mark left the county with closure rather than another argument about what his mother intended, because her paperwork had already answered that question. He and Wade never became close friends. They reached the sort of respect that comes from one party honoring terms and the other one meeting them without delay. Dina Cho's role shifted after that meeting as well. Her first reading of Wade had been wrong in a familiar way, appearance mapped to risk. The corrected map did not create embarrassment theater in the bank lobby. Dinah updated internal notes, moved Wade into Treasury and operating services rather than lending pipeline, and helped set up cash management that matched seasonal needs. They kept the relationship practical. Quarterly check-ins covered liquidity, feed purchasing windows, insurance renewals, and fraud controls. No one pretended the June meeting had never happened. They treated it as a professional course correction completed in one day. Owning ground solved tenancy risk and opened exposure to a different cycle. In 2023, commodity pressure tightened across the region. Feed costs stayed stubborn, hog pricing swung without mercy, and rate increases after 2022 made variable operating lines harder to carry. Producers who had scaled on floating debt did not fail for the lack of effort. They got squeezed between costs they could not control and interest expenses that climbed while margins narrowed. The abstract argument about leverage turned visible in monthly statements. Caleb Ruiz was the nearest and clearest contrast because his farm had expanded fast during favorable years. He ran larger volume than Wade and carried higher gross revenue, which looked strong while borrowing costs stayed low. His structure included variable rate operating lines and rented tracts that depended on steady cash flow. When rates jumped and feed pressure persisted, His debt service rose at the same time gross margin fell. By harvest 2023, he gave up 2 rented tracts to preserve the core of his operation. The contraction hurt, especially because he had worked hard for every acre and had not expected the floor to move this quickly. 2 other neighbors felt the same pressure, with different details. Teresa Long had financed a near-new combine and rolled a variable line tied to inventory values. As rates reset, her annual interest expense climbed enough to force a machinery sale she had hoped to avoid. Ben Halverson rented high-priced ground on short commitments and entered 2023 with tight liquidity. 1 week cycle pushed him into renegotiation he could not complete in time. Neither Teresa nor Ben was careless. They made decisions that looked rational under ordinary assumptions and got hit by conditions that punished leverage asymmetrically. Wade watched all of it with empathy, sharpened by the 2015 memory she never forgot. Caleb's numbers became unsustainable by late fall. He met with creditors, sold discretionary machinery, cut labor hours, and still faced a gap that threatened animal care if staffing dropped further. Pride kept him from asking for help at first. Wade waited without hovering. One afternoon he called, asked a direct question about barn management work if she ever needed it, and left silence after the sentence. That call resolved a practical obstacle for both of them. Caleb needed stable cash income to stabilize family finances. Wade needed high-skill management as she integrated ownership responsibilities with livestock throughput. She offered a salaried barn manager role with clear duties and predictable pay. He accepted. The employment transition in 2024 carried no humiliation scene. Wade did not frame it as rescue. Caleb did not frame it as defeat. They structured a real job around his strengths, herd health monitoring, maintenance scheduling, feed coordination, and employee oversight. Salary came with benefits and regular hours that allowed him to keep a smaller, independent enterprise on weekends. By 2025, his household had rebuilt emergency savings, stopped chasing expensive short-term credit, and ended the variable rate expansion strategy that had driven the 2023 contraction. His 2 lost rented tracts did not come back, yet his family finances stopped bleeding. In this story, stability counted as victory. While that was unfolding, Wade started looking at legacy in concrete terms. Owning 260 acres debt-free changed what she could do for someone else without risking her own operation. Janelle Price had skill, grit, and only 40 acres to work with, enough to prove competence, not enough to generate equipment capacity without outside help. She needed a startup equipment note to bridge that gap. Conventional lenders offered higher rates and tighter collateral than her early balance sheet could tolerate. Wade reviewed Janelle's plan line by line, challenged assumptions on fuel and repairs, and made an offer. The note terms were specific: $96,000 principal at 2.0% interest with 7-year amortization, annual payment approximately $14,833 under standard amortization math. Wade required insurance, lien filing on purchased equipment, and quarterly operating reports, the same discipline she applied to her own books. Janelle used funds for practical assets, a reliable used tractor, a no-till drill, and transport upgrades that let her control timing instead of waiting on custom windows. The interest rate gave breathing room without turning the loan into charity theater. Responsibility stayed with Janelle, and she wanted it that way. That loan resolved another question. What wealth is for when it has already secured the owner? Wade's balance sheet after purchase was quieter than before, lower liquidity, higher fixed asset ownership, no real estate debt. She could have hoarded every dollar and remained safe. She chose a different path with guardrails, helping one young operator at terms designed for survival rather than extraction. In 2025, Janelle remained operating, payments current, acreage management improving, and confidence rising for the right reasons, measured outcomes, not social media visibility. Wade's own operation from 2024 into 2025 stayed intentionally plain. The same truck kept running. Repairs beat replacement in every category where reliability and safety held. Barn throughput remained near established capacity, with 1,100 head per turn and 2.5 turns per year as baseline planning. Land ownership changed risk profile in downturns because rent obligation disappeared, replaced by taxes and maintenance she could plan without landlord uncertainty. Manure nutrient credits continued to offset part of commercial fertilizer spend, never counted as full replacement in her budget. The system looked almost boring, which is exactly how resilient systems usually look from the outside. People around town still misread her at first glance if they had not seen the county records. Jacket cuffs worn, pickup paint faded, no showroom upgrades, no social performance of success. New acquaintances occasionally assumed she was one bad cycle away from quitting. Dina saw those moments now and usually said nothing, because correction did not require speeches. The deed book already held the answer. So did the absence of liens. So did 6 years of retained earnings converted into owned ground at the exact moment tenancy risk peaked. Arithmetic had done what argument could not. Ruth Delaney's legacy stayed visible in that outcome. Her insistence on written agreements, recorded terms, and clear rights prevented conflict when emotions and estate pressure could have burned everything down. Wade visited Ruth's grave once after closing, stood there for a few minutes, and went back to chores. Mark Delaney heard about that from a neighbor and sent one short message thanking Wade for a clean process. That exchange closed a loop that might have stayed raw for years in another family. Documentation can feel cold while everyone is healthy. It feels merciful when people are gone. The philosophical line that began at the 2015 auction held through every test because it was built on observed consequences, not slogans. Wade had seen good operators fail when leverage met bad timing. She chose slower accumulation, accepted years of being underestimated, and protected optionality until one decisive window opened. When that window arrived in 2022, she did not ask permission from a lender, did not wait for committee approval, and did not lose the ground to someone else's timetable. She matched terms, wired funds, and converted rented vulnerability into permanent ownership in one move. The vow from the 180-acre foreclosure was paid in full when she stood on her own 260 acres and hog site with no mortgage behind the deed. The contrast with Caleb, Teresa, and Ben never became moral theater. Their setbacks were painful evidence of structural trade-offs, not personal failure narratives. Caleb's transition to salaried management gave his household stability and preserved his expertise inside a stronger balance sheet, and his operating plan no longer depended on variable rate leverage for growth. Teresa rebuilt after machinery liquidation by downsizing and focusing on lower overhead acreage. Ben renegotiated core leases and cut exposure to short commitments. None of them needed lectures. They needed breathing room and realistic terms, the same two things Wade had protected for herself over 6 years on rented ground. Dinah's final perspective by 2025 was quietly candid when asked by younger bankers about risk signals. She told them visible consumption is weak underwriting data in agriculture. Records matter, covenants matter, and behavior over time matters most. She cited one internal case without naming Wade. Operator looked poor, carried no term debt, held verified liquidity, at $1,462,000, closed $1,248,000 plus $22,000 in costs cash, remained profitable, later extended a disciplined private note to a new entrant. The lesson fit on one page and challenged an entire habit of first impressions. Janelle's progress through 2025 gave that page a second life. On a 40-acre start, she had little margin for mistakes. Yet equipment control changed timing enough to improve yields and reduce contractor dependence. Her annual payment, near $14,833, remained manageable because rate and structure matched real cash flow. She sent reports on time, asked early when projections slipped, and adjusted before small gaps became crises. Wade answered questions in short sentences, reviewed numbers, and declined to become a motivational speaker. Respect ran both ways because both treated arithmetic as shared ground. By late 2025, the roll call could be read cleanly. Wade Tucker owned the 260 acres and hog site outright, kept running 1,100 head per turn at 2.5 turns yearly, and remained debt-free on real estate and term equipment. Ruth Delaney remained the absent architect of the legal structure. Deceased in 2022, remembered for paperwork that protected intent. Mark Delaney settled the estate cleanly, after accepting Wade's matched cash close. Lena Cho maintained a professional operating services relationship and became a better risk reader because she revised her assumptions. Caleb Ruiz lost 2 rented tracks in 2023, accepted salaried barn manager work under Wade, and stabilized family finances by 2025 after ending his variable rate expansion model. Janelle Price kept operating after receiving the $96,000 note at 2.0% over 7 years, payment schedule current. The final arithmetic stayed simple enough to fit in a pocket notebook. 6-year lease window secured from January 1st, 2016 through December 31st, 2021. Annual lease commitments of $36,720 handled on time. Upfront refurbishment cash of $84,000 to make barns dependable. Throughput held at 2,750 head per year from 1,100 per turn and 2.5 turns. 5-year average net operating surplus from 2017 through 2021 fixed at $214,000. Liquidity by June 2022 verified at $1,462,000. Cash purchase in July 2022, $1,248,000 plus $22,000 closing costs. Remaining liquidity near $192,000, offset by full ownership and 0 real estate debt. 1 private development loan in 2024, $96,000 at 2.0% over 7 years, roughly $14,833 annual payment, current. Nothing in that ledger required a public reveal scene with applause. The people who needed to know knew. The county recorder knew when deed and no mortgage posted. The bank knew when funds verified in one morning. The executor knew when terms were matched exactly and probate closed. Caleb knew when steady salary replaced panic borrowing. Janelle knew when fair rate capital arrived with accountability attached. Wade never stood in a room and explained her philosophy at length because the land under her boots already carried the explanation in plain language: owned ground, paid for ground, kept ground. On winter nights, lights still burn in the barns at odd hours, same as when she was a tenant with something to prove. Ownership did not change chores. Hogs still need feed on schedule. Fans still need maintenance before heat arrives. Taxes still come due. What changed was the pressure vector. No landlord deadline could remove her from the place she had built. No lender could call a term note that did not exist. No appearance-based judgment could alter deed status. The old truck still rolls home on gravel. Odometer climbing past numbers some people once laughed at, carrying someone who spent 6 years being underestimated and one day owning the ground outright. That is where the story settles, not in spectacle, in continuity. Wade keeps farming. Caleb keeps managing barns and rebuilding. Janelle keeps growing on 40 acres with a note she can carry. Dina keeps checking numbers before narratives. Mark keeps his mother's estate closed and intact in memory. Ruth's signature keeps doing work after her death because she wrote things down. The foreclosure memory from 2015 remains painful, and it also remains useful. A clear picture of what happens when debt collides with a bad sequence. Wade took that picture seriously, organized a life around it, and when the ownership test arrived in 2022, she passed it with cash, records, and silence.